The sound of a mother bear's body hitting the ground was unlike anything the Reyes family had ever heard. A heavy thud that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself, followed by a silence so complete it felt as if the entire Alaskan wilderness held its breath. Just 30 feet from their front porch, where moments ago they had been enjoying morning coffee, now lay the massive form of the black bear they had come to know over the past months. Her cub, barely larger than a medium-sized dog, stood frozen beside her fallen body. The Reyes family had not always lived this close to the wild. 6 months ago, Miguel and Elena had made the life-changing decision to leave behind their cramped apartment in Seattle, trading city convenience for the rugged beauty of the Alaskan frontier. Their small cabin, nestled at the edge of a vast national forest near Denali, represented everything they had dreamed of providing for their children, Isabella and Marco. The transition had not been easy. 11-year-old Isabella missed her friends terribly at first, while 7-year-old Marco had developed a fear of the strange sounds that echoed through the woods at night. Elena worried about their isolation, especially during the harsh winter months ahead. Miguel sometimes questioned whether they had made the right choice, especially on days when simple errands became complicated expeditions. But slowly, the rhythm of nature had worked its magic on the family. Isabella began documenting the changing seasons in detailed sketches. Marco overcame his fears by learning to identify the calls of owls and wolves. Elena found peace in the stunning views that greeted her each morning. Miguel discovered a sense of purpose in providing for his family's needs in this challenging environment. They had been warned about the wildlife, of course. Park rangers had provided detailed instructions about storing food, avoiding certain trails during mating seasons, and what to do if they encountered various animals. Bears were at the top of that list. Respect their space. Never approach. Keep food secured. Make noise when hiking. Nothing in those warnings, however, had prepared them for the heartbreaking scene now unfolding before their eyes. The Reyes family first spotted the bears 3 weeks after moving in. It was Marco who noticed them, his high-pitched voice calling the others to the kitchen window one misty morning in early spring. There at the edge of the clearing, where their yard surrendered to the wilderness, stood a mother black bear and her small cub. Miguel instinctively moved the children back from the window, remembering all the safety briefings. But curiosity soon overcame caution as they realized the bears were intent only on the berry bushes that grew in abundance along the tree line. The mother bear moved with surprising grace for her size, guiding her cub with gentle nudges and watchful eyes. "They must have just come out of hibernation," Elena whispered, not wanting to disturb the moment with her voice. She had read that bears emerging from their winter sleep would be hungry, searching for the first available food sources. After that first sighting, the bears appeared every few days, usually in the soft light of early morning or the golden haze of dusk. The family began adjusting their routine, gathering quietly by the large picture window with cups of hot chocolate or tea, waiting for their wild neighbors to make an appearance. Isabella named the mother Stella, for the small patch of white fur on her chest that resembled a star. The cub became known as Pip, for his small size and the playful way he pipped about, exploring everything with boundless curiosity. Though Miguel reminded everyone that these were wild animals, not pets, even he couldn't resist the family's naming tradition. Over the following weeks, the Reyes family witnessed countless touching moments between mother and cub. They watched as Stella taught Pip to climb trees, her powerful body demonstrating before the little one attempted the same with far less grace but admirable determination. They observed fishing lessons in the small stream that cut through the property, Stella showing remarkable patience as Pip splashed and missed fish after fish. The bears never approached the house directly, and the family was careful never to leave food outside that might attract them closer. It was an arrangement of mutual respect. For the Reyes family, these observation sessions became treasured rituals, a window into a world most people never got to witness firsthand. Elena began keeping a log of the bears' activities. April 12th, Stella showed Pip how to strip bark from trees. April 17th, Pip caught his first fish. April 23rd, Stella stood guard while Pip napped in the afternoon sun. None of them could have guessed how deeply they would come to care for these wild creatures, or how soon their routine wildlife watching would transform into something far more dramatic. The morning began with a peculiar silence. No birds sang in the trees surrounding the Reyes cabin. No squirrels chattered from the branches. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Elena noticed it first as she stood on the porch, coffee cup warming her hands against the chill morning air. "Something feels different today," she said as Miguel joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. They had just called the children for breakfast when they spotted Stella and Pip emerging from the tree line. Immediately, Elena sensed something was wrong. The mother bear moved slowly, her normally fluid gait now stiff and labored. Pip circled around her, occasionally stopping to look up at his mother with what appeared to be concern. "Miguel," Elena whispered, gripping her husband's arm. "Look at Stella. Something's not right." Miguel narrowed his eyes, watching the bear's unsteady progress. "She's favoring her right side. And her head. She keeps shaking it." The children joined them on the porch, bowls of cereal forgotten in their hands as they too noticed the bear's strange behavior. Isabella, always observant, pointed out something they had missed. "There's something on her fur, near her shoulder. It looks wet." Miguel squinted against the morning light. "Blood," he confirmed quietly. "She's injured." They watched in silent concern as Stella made her way across the clearing toward the stream that ran near their property. Her path brought her closer to the house than she had ever ventured before. Pip followed dutifully behind, occasionally making small sounds that carried clearly through the still morning air. Then, not 30 feet from their porch, it happened. Stella stopped suddenly, her massive body swaying. She took one more faltering step, then collapsed with a heavy thud that seemed to shake the ground. Her large body crumpled onto its side, one paw outstretched toward the house as if reaching for help. "Oh my God!" Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marco began to cry, a soft whimpering sound that mirrored the distressed noises now coming from Pip. The cub circled his fallen mother, nudging her with his nose, pawing gently at her unmoving form. "Is she dead?" Isabella whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Miguel shook his head. "I can see her breathing, but she's very still." The family stood frozen on their porch, caught in a moment of crisis none of them had prepared for. The safety guidelines were clear about keeping distance from bears, especially mothers with cubs, but the situation unfolding before them defied all standard advice. "What do we do?" Elena asked, her voice tight with uncertainty. "We can't just watch her die. But if we go closer—" Miguel ran his hand through his hair, mind racing through their options. "The cub is so agitated. If we approach and Stella wakes up suddenly, or if the cub feels threatened—" "But we have to do something," Isabella insisted, her young face set with determination despite her tears. They all knew the dangers. A wounded bear was unpredictable. A frightened cub could be equally dangerous. Yet the tableau before them demanded some kind of response, some effort to help these creatures that had become part of their daily lives. As they debated their next move, none of them could take their eyes off Pip, who was now exhibiting behavior that would soon bring tears to all their eyes. Pip's behavior changed the moment his mother hit the ground. The playful, sometimes clumsy cub transformed before the Reyes family's eyes. His initial confusion quickly gave way to what could only be described as purposeful action. First came the gentle nudging. Pip circled Stella's massive form, pushing his nose against her face, her ears, her neck. His small paws pressed against her shoulder, applying pressure, then releasing, as if trying to wake her from a deep sleep. When this produced no response, his efforts became more urgent. He pushed harder, his small body straining against her unmoving bulk. The sounds he made pierced the morning air. Gone were the playful grunts the family had grown accustomed to hearing during their observations. Instead, Pip released a series of distressed calls that alternated between high-pitched whimpers and deeper moans that seemed impossibly mature for his small size. Each cry seemed more desperate than the last, as if he were calling out to anyone or anything that might help. The Reyes family remained frozen on their porch, tears streaming down their faces as the scene unfolded. Even Miguel, who had always maintained an emotional distance from the bears, found himself wiping moisture from his eyes. There was something profoundly human in the cub's desperation, something that transcended the boundaries between species. Then came the moment that would haunt their memories forever. Pip suddenly stopped his frantic movements and stood still, as if contemplating. His small head turned toward the forest, then back to his mother. With what appeared to be determination, he trotted away from Stella's side and disappeared into the underbrush. The family exchanged confused glances, wondering if the cub had abandoned his mother out of fear or confusion. But less than 5 minutes later, Pip re-emerged from the forest. In his mouth, he carried a small branch laden with the same berries the family had often observed Stella eating. With careful movements, he placed the berries near his mother's mouth, nudging them closer with his nose. When Stella showed no interest in the offering, Pip once again disappeared into the forest. This time, he returned with his fur wet around his muzzle and chest. He approached his mother's face and pressed his wet snout against her mouth, as if offering her water he had collected from the stream. The water droplets glistened in the morning light as they fell from his fur onto Stella's unresponsive face. This pattern continued as the cub made trip after trip. Sometimes he returned with more berries. Other times he brought different plants that Stella had favored in the past. Once he struggled back, dragging a small fish he had somehow managed to catch, the effort clearly taxing his small body. Between these foraging missions, Pip maintained a vigilant guard over his fallen mother. When a curious raven approached too closely, the small cub reared up with a ferocity that belied his size, sending the bird flapping hurriedly away. He positioned his body protectively, first on one side of Stella, then the other, as if securing a perimeter around her vulnerable form. Most remarkable was how he continually tried to rouse her. His attempts evolved from gentle nudges to carefully climbing onto her side, then sliding off in what appeared to be an attempt to create movement that might wake her. He tugged at her ears with his teeth, never hard enough to hurt, but with clear purpose. When the sun shifted position, casting harsh light on Stella's face, Pip gathered nearby fallen leaves and placed them over her head, creating a makeshift shade. Each action displayed an intelligence and devotion that left the watching family speechless. These were not the random behaviors of a confused animal, but deliberate, thoughtful attempts to help. The cub's unwavering dedication to his mother's care revealed a depth of connection that transcended human understanding of wildlife. In Pip's desperate efforts, the Reyes family witnessed love in its most fundamental form. The Reyes family stood transfixed on their porch, all thoughts of breakfast or daily routines forgotten. Elena pressed her hand against her heart, feeling it ache with each of Pip's desperate attempts to revive his mother. Tears streamed freely down her face, her breathing coming in small, choked gasps. Beside her, Miguel had long since abandoned his usual stoic demeanor. His eyes glistened and his arm tightened around Elena's shoulders, seeking comfort as much as offering it. The children made no effort to hide their emotions. Isabella sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking as she leaned against her father. Marco buried his face in his mother's side, peeking out occasionally with red-rimmed eyes to check if anything had changed. The family had become unwitting witnesses to a display of love and devotion so pure that it cut through any remaining notion that wild animals were merely creatures of instinct without deeper emotional lives. Miguel finally broke their stunned silence by reaching for his phone. Their nearest neighbors, the Caldwells, lived 3 miles down the road. Richard Caldwell answered immediately, hearing the unusual tension in Miguel's voice. Within 20 minutes, the Caldwells' truck rumbled up the gravel driveway, carrying not just Richard and his wife Beth, but their teenage sons as well. The Caldwells had lived in Alaska for generations. They approached wildlife encounters with practical knowledge honed over decades. Yet even Richard, who had seen bears in countless situations, found himself rendered speechless by the scene before him. Beth, a nurse at the regional medical center, pressed her handkerchief to her mouth, her professional detachment crumbling at the sight of the cub's unwavering efforts. Word spread quickly in the small community. By midday, half a dozen vehicles had parked at a respectful distance from the Reyes home. Neighbors who sometimes went months without seeing each other stood shoulder to shoulder, binoculars passing from hand to hand. Some brought food for the gathered crowd, others offered camping chairs for the elderly who couldn't stand for long periods. No one spoke above a whisper, as if by mutual agreement. Mrs. Patel from the general store wiped her eyes continuously on her apron. The 2 Hanson brothers, known throughout the area for their toughness in the logging industry, stood with their weathered hats in their hands, heads bowed as if in prayer. Even Pastor Williams from the small community church stood in reverent silence, occasionally placing a comforting hand on the shoulders of those most overwhelmed by the scene. Children were hushed gently when they asked too loud questions. A few took out phones to record the event, but most found themselves lowering their devices, feeling that something so sacred should be experienced rather than captured. Several of the older community members who had spent lifetimes observing wildlife confirmed they had never witnessed anything like this display of animal devotion. What had begun as one family's private wildlife drama had transformed into a community vigil. Strangers passed tissues to one another, farmers stood beside teachers, old political rivals found common ground in their shared emotion. Through their tears, this diverse group of people found themselves united in their witness of something larger than themselves, something that spoke to the universal nature of love and loyalty that transcended species. As the hours passed, the reality of the situation began to settle over the gathered crowd. Stella had not moved except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Pip's energy never waned, his determination to help his mother remaining as strong as when she first collapsed. But the afternoon shadows were lengthening, and with them came the awareness that decisions needed to be made. Miguel gathered with Richard Caldwell and some of the other men who had experience with wildlife. Their conversation was hushed but intense, weighing options that all carried risk. Everyone understood the dangers of approaching an injured bear, even one that appeared unconscious. If Stella suddenly revived in pain or fear, she could be deadly. And there was Pip to consider, small but fierce in his protection of his mother. Elena and Beth Caldwell consulted Beth's medical reference books, searching for any insight into what might have happened to Stella. The wound on her shoulder suggested an infection, possibly from a fight with another animal, or perhaps a poacher's bullet that had only grazed her. Without closer examination, they could only speculate. The children, meanwhile, had formed their own council. Isabella, Marco, and the other community children huddled together at the edge of the porch, their young faces serious as they offered their own solutions, unbound by adult caution. Time was working against them. If Stella could be saved, it needed to happen soon. If she couldn't, then Pip's future became a pressing concern. A cub his age could not survive alone in the wilderness. Finally, Mr. Hansen, who served as the local wildlife liaison, made the call to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. His conversation was brief but thorough, describing the situation with the precision of someone who understood both the urgency and the protocol. Wildlife officials promised to dispatch their nearest emergency response team immediately, but warned it could be 2 hours before they arrived. The wait was excruciating. Some community members had to leave due to other obligations, departing with visible reluctance and extracting promises from neighbors to call with updates. Those who remained established in impromptu camp, maintaining a respectful distance but unwilling to abandon their vigil. Through it all, Pip remained steadfast. When the humans moved closer to get a better view, he positioned himself between them and his mother, his small body tense with protective instinct. He did not flee into the forest as a typical cub might, but stood his ground, occasionally glancing back at Stella as if assuring her that he would allow no harm to come to her while she slept. The wildlife response team arrived as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. 2 trucks bearing the Alaska Department of Fish and Game logo pulled up the gravel driveway, followed by a specialized veterinary vehicle. The gathered crowd parted respectfully, hope surging through the group at the sight of professional help. Dr. Sarah Takahashi, the lead wildlife veterinarian, assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. Her team unloaded equipment while she conferred with Miguel and the others who had been present since the beginning. Her gaze continually returned to the fallen bear and the devoted cub, her expression revealing both professional interest and personal concern. The rescue team's first challenge became immediately apparent. Any approach toward Stella was met with defensive posturing from Pip. The cub placed himself squarely between the humans and his mother, his small body seeming to grow larger with protective intent. His vocalizations changed from the heartbreaking whimpers directed at his mother to warning growls aimed at those who sought to approach. Dr. Takahashi explained the delicate balance they needed to achieve. Tranquilizing Pip carried risk given his small size and already stressed state. Yet attempting to treat Stella with the cub interfering could endanger both the bear and the medical team. Time continued working against them as Stella's breathing became more labored. It was one of the wildlife technicians who suggested an unconventional approach. Noticing how Pip had been bringing food to his mother, he proposed using this behavior as part of their strategy. Under Dr. Takahashi's supervision, they prepared a small amount of berries mixed with a mild sedative suitable for a cub of Pip's size. The team placed the treated berries near Stella's head, then retreated. As they had hoped, Pip investigated the offering, sniffing it thoroughly before attempting to nudge it toward his mother's mouth. In his effort to help Stella, he ingested enough of the mixture to gradually calm him, though not enough to render him unconscious. As the sedative took effect, Pip's movements slowed. He continued his protective vigil, but could no longer maintain his defensive posture. When Dr. Takahashi and her team finally approached with stretchers and medical equipment, Pip watched with heavy-lidded eyes, occasionally attempting to intercept them, but lacking the energy to do so effectively. What touched the onlookers most deeply was how, even in his sedated state, Pip refused to leave Stella's side. When the team lifted her onto the specialized stretcher, Pip followed unsteadily, pressing against her whenever the humans paused in their work. When they administered emergency fluids and antibiotics, he watched each movement with intense focus, as if understanding their purpose. Dr. Takahashi worked methodically, cleaning and treating the infected wound on Stella's shoulder, checking her vital signs, and preparing her for transport. Throughout the procedure, she spoke softly to both bears, her tone soothing even as her hands moved with urgent precision. The Wildlife Center became a sanctuary of hope during the 3 days of Stella's intensive treatment. Dr. Takahashi had arranged for Pip to remain near his mother, though safely separated to allow for proper medical care. The infection that had nearly claimed Stella's life responded gradually to the powerful antibiotics. On the third morning, she finally opened her eyes. Word spread quickly through the community. The Reyes family and many of their neighbors gathered at the center, waiting anxiously outside. When Dr. Takahashi invited them to witness the reunion through observation windows, not a single eye remained dry. Stella, though weakened, raised her head at the sound of Pip's excited whimpers as the barrier between them was carefully removed. The cub approached tentatively at first, then rushed forward to nuzzle against his mother's face. Stella's large paw gently encircled her baby, drawing him closer in an embrace that transcended animal instinct. Pip's entire body wiggled with joy as he snuggled against the mother he had refused to abandon. The rescue team, hardened by years of wildlife work, wiped tears openly from their faces. Elena clutched Miguel's hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. Children pressed their faces against the glass, their earlier sorrows transformed into expressions of wonder and delight. 2 weeks later, the community gathered again to witness Stella and Pip's return to the wild. Released near the Reyes property where they had first been observed, the bears paused at the forest edge. Stella, now recovered, turned to look at the assembled humans before leading her cub into the shelter of the trees, disappearing from sight but not from memory. The experience changed something fundamental in the community. Conservation efforts that had struggled for volunteers suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with offers of help. The school established a wildlife education program, with Isabella proudly serving as student coordinator. Miguel worked with rangers to create bear-safe guidelines for all local properties. During community gatherings, conversation inevitably turned to the bear miracle, as it had come to be known. The story traveled beyond their small town, touching hearts across the state and eventually the country. In their ordinary lives on the edge of the Alaskan wilderness, the Reyes family and their neighbors had witnessed something extraordinary, a testament to the power of love that bridged the divide between human and animal understanding. The bears occasionally returned to the edge of the Reyes property, always keeping a safe distance, but visible enough to assure their human friends of their continued welfare. Each sighting felt like a gift, a reminder of the day they had all learned that devotion in its purest form knows no species, no boundaries, only the unbreakable bond between those who love one another. If this story touched your heart, there are more wildlife miracles waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly updates on amazing animal rescue stories that will remind you of the beauty and compassion that exists in our natural world. Join our community of wildlife enthusiasts who believe in the power of sharing these emotional moments that connect us all. Hit that subscribe button now and never miss another heartwarming reunion between animals and those who care for them.